Welcome to J Lowe Artist YouTube channel. Today we're doing watercolors on 300 series cold press illustration board. It's a lot of fun, it's good practice, and we'll be learning some techniques of just direct painting. Nothing really advanced or anything, but it's good practice. So come on along and do some painting with us. And remember, art makes life better.
First thing you want to do when you're using watercolors like this is get water in each of your colors. And we're not really sure how many of these colors we're going to use, so I'm going to put just a couple of drops of water in each tub here. And we're just going to let capillary action work its magic on our paints. We have our palette, which is our mixing area. Hopefully it's nice and clean. I've decided what we're going to draw paint. I've got this picture here that's kind of nice. It has some two-point perspective things in it, like the truck and the barn. And if you think about this, you look at your edges as they recede into space, your vanishing point is over here. And you've got another vanishing point, and this one's kind of hard to see, but if you so some of it's hidden in there. It's not important if it's perfect, if it's spot on. I bet that truck's worth a pretty penny. It looks like it's in fairly good shape. That some person who would like to restore that would be happy to have it. I'm going to add a little bit to mine because my format's a little different. So I want some sky in there, I want some hills, but I'm going to change my composition just a little bit, just to include some of that stuff. I like to kind of erase some of my lines just because I don't like them all in there. It's a guideline. All the drawing part is a guideline for me. And so there's certain parts that I think, oh, I can get rid of that and not miss it. Some people like to see the drawing part. They like to have that drawing part in there. That's up to you. I'm not attached to my drawing parts that I do. So I personally like to get rid of them as much as I can. Because again, they're just guidelines for me. You want to get this in as quickly as you can, just because the painting part's going to take us the longest to do. We always paint back to forward. In other words, we're going to do the sky first, then the mountains and trees, and then we'll work our way towards the truck. The truck is the fun part, in my opinion, although it all can be fun, but you've got that idea of overlapping. And so as your edges overlap, like the truck overlaps the barn, that overlaps the mountain, that overlaps the sky. So if you paint back to forward, then you get all that overlapping and it works fine. If you do the truck first, then your edges just don't look as nice. And besides that, the background is exactly that background. You can just throw it in. So we're going to do these little happy little clouds. We're going to do some of that blue. So with the clouds, because the clouds are white, you just leave them out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my water brush, and while we've been talking, while we've been drawing, our paint has been mixing. So all our paint is, colors are already there, already mixing. So I'm just going to take my water brush, and I'm going to do the background here, especially the sky. I'm just going to layer in some water, and it needs to be fairly thick, fairly wet. Not so much that it's drippy wet, but enough that it's shiny wet. And with water paint, you have to move fairly quickly, because if not, it dries. So I've got my two brushes. I put water in the background. Now I'm just going to pick up some blue. I want to mix a little bit of that blue with a tiny bit of green. So I'm going to move my blue onto my palette. Get rid of as much paint off your brush as you can. You just want the half your tip of your brush, quarter of an inch. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of green to that blue. Mix that up, and then I'm going to drop that in. And as I do, I've got to be mindful of the clouds. And so I'm just going to dabble it in, just like this. Just dabble it in and allow that to move around and to see what happens to it. It kind of smears around. And just leave some areas out for your clouds. And allow it to just kind of fuzz. Do its fuzzy thing. And there's your clouds. You want to be kind of spontaneous with this. That's one thing about water paint. I mean, you can get very detailed, but you also want it kind of spontaneous. And as that dries, if you think, well, I wish it could go darker, just remember that your water paints are going to be lighter as they dry. It's kind of like your shirts, when you get them wet, they get dark, and then, or your pants, and then as it dries, it lightens up again. So water paint's that kind of that way. It dries lighter than when you lay it down. So I want a little bit more pigment in there, especially towards the top. That is also going to give us some dimension in our clouds. So there's some of those that you may want, a little bit more dark in between the clouds, and depending on your sky, sometimes your sky's got a little bit of purple in it. The sky this morning was quite purpley. So you can layer that in as much as you want to. Just remember to leave things out. That's your sky. Just leave it out. Also, usually your sky is a little darker towards the top and lighter as it goes down towards the horizon. I'm sucking up a little bit of moisture with this other brush, just on the end. You can do that too. That brush is kind of like a sponge. You can even use sponges if you want. And when you're done, don't clean your brush in your water. Dip it in the water and then clean it in your towel. Because if you clean your brush in your water, it's going to go muddy. Nobody wants muddy water. So both of your brushes should be nice and clean now. You still have a little bit of blue in there, which is okay, because even your rocks in your mountain have a little bit of blue in them. So we're going to use that blue to our advantage. Remember that as things get farther away from you, they get bluer, hazier, fuzzier. So the mountains in the background are going to be a little more blue, but even your shadows towards the front have blue in them. So it's awesome to start with blue. Some of that is kind of yellowy colored, so I'm going to take my yellow out and I'm going to dabble in some yellow into my mountains. And then I'll go a little bit of blue in there. Yellow and blue make green. And maybe add a little bit of brown to that just to darken in some of that green here and there. But right now, I'm gonna take some of this yellow. Well, first, before I do though, I want to add some water to this. So I'm going to take my water brush. I'm just going to add water to all the background, or at least most of the background. Kind of trying to avoid some of those areas. Just where I see that I'm going to dabble some of that yellow in, I want to add water to that. Because I want it to kind of fuzz out. That's what that water is going to do, is kind of make it fuzzy. When you want sharp edges, you want to paint dry. So, but right now, background is going to be fuzzy. Just some of that background, lots of water in there. Then I'm going to take my yellow, and I'm just going to dabble in some of this yellow. And you don't have to have it everywhere, just here and there. I'm not concerned about trees right now. I'm just doing color. We'll get the texture of the trees later on. Right now, just color. And I'm just dabbling it in. You just leave spaces out. Because if you're looking at the trees there, you're getting your inspiration from up there. If you wanted to, right now, because you've got nice clean yellow, some of that yellow in the grass that's over here, you could do that, maybe here next to the truck. Before you do, dip your one brush in the water, because you want that soft and fuzzy too. As it dries, we'll come back in and do some tighter details. Details are created by the use of value. So I've got that nice and watery. And then I'm going to layer in some of that yellow in there. Must have been a little bit of blue left in my brush because there's a little bit of green poking through there. That's okay. Next thing I want to do is maybe some of those rocks, because I've got to build the trees kind of around the rocks. So if you want some of those rocky cliffs in there, I'm just going to use a tiny bit of purple. And so I'm just going to grab that little bit of purple. I'm going to lay it out over here. There's a little bit of yellows already in my brush. What happens with yellow and purple? Yes, very good. They counteract each other. And so my purple, as I lay it out here and I do this, it's going to kind of go purpley gray, because that yellow is going to counteract that. And that's kind of what I want in my rocks. So I can come up into my rocks and I can just start laying in some rock up in there. Just say, there's some shadowy areas in the rocks. I'm just dabbling that in there. I can leave little spots open because some of those rocks are very light, or some of those rock areas. I'm just creating kind of a texture with that purpley gray. If a little bit of that gets in the yellow, that's okay. A little bit in the blue, that's okay too. So it's all about texture. I want to get some of that texture in there. So that purpley color there, that purpley gray. And if this is important, that this is kind of a portrait, that it's an exact place, you want to get everything kind of where it goes. But for us, I think it's just the texture and the color and a little bit of the subject matter, but we don't care if this is Vermont or Panguitch, you know. It's not important to us. And we can layer in darkness as we go. Remember, it's that darkness that's going to get us our contrast and our forms. Some people like to just layer in the basic colors. They call them flats. So if that's something that you'd like to do, you're welcome to do that. Layer those basic colors in. Like the red, that red-brown from the barn. Maybe put a little bit of that into the truck because there's kind of rusty, that rust color. I'm just going to do the background. I just want to get the background done. So now I'm going to go into my green. And if you have a little bit of, if you mix a little bit of that in with your purple, that's okay too. That'll tone it down, dull it out a little bit, give it a little different variety. You can mix some of that in with your blue too if you want to. It's going to give it a little more variety of color, because every tree's got its own greenness. So for your pine trees, you might want to mix a little bit of purple into your pine trees. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that now in my background. Remember, as things get farther away, they get more blue. So you've got a little bit more blue in the green that's on our right side, the left side of the picture, our right side. And a little bit more of the darker green on our left side, the right side of the picture. So it's hard to see what I'm doing, but you just kind of just do these little tiny strokes. Try to give it that texture of a pine tree. You can go over the top of some of that yellow, but you want to leave some of that yellow kind of dabbling through as well, because it's going to feel like those aspens. And I may want to come back in with some more pigment, because as it dries, remember, it goes a little lighter. So I'm just going to keep dabbling that in, leaving out some of that yellow. Remember, you want it to look kind of like aspens in the distance. So I'm just painting a little bit of that in there, leaving a little bit out. I can always come back in and add more. And it's the texture that's important. If you want to change colors, remember to clean your brush in your paper towel, not in your water. So I've just added more pigment, and that's going to make it go a little darker. So I've just taken and added a little bit more pigment to my mix up there. Still got a little bit of blue in there. And I'm just going to go back in now and just add some more. Just here and there. Don't need it everywhere. Just here and there. It's the texture that's important. I'm giving just a little flip. I'm just going to put your brush down and just give it a little flip, and that's your pine tree. Easy pine trees. I'm just dabbling in some paint in there. I can go over the top of what I've done. It's just the texture that's important. Just use the tip of your brush. I'm not even pushing down on it. Just barely touching the surface. And also, if you notice your clouds, as it dries, the paint kind of does its thing too. You know, there's that thought process with all of this, that every entity, everything has its way. And water paint is the same way. If you fight it, you're going to end up with mud. And so you just kind of let it do its thing. You lay it in and you just kind of let it kind of happen. And I'm really just taking inspiration from my picture. I'm not worried that it's exactly like that. And the closer you get, the bigger your strokes can be. You want to go all over, any place you feel like you need it. You don't really dip into your brush or into your paint very much, and you just let that paint just go out of your brush. This is a little bit more purple mixed in with my green. The yellow and the green is going to counteract the purple, so it's not going to look so purpley, but it does look like a shadow. It's kind of nice. Again, just want to remind you, don't overwork it. You know, let it do its thing, because the water paint will kind of mix with each other. Just kind of let it happen. As I get a little closer and I want some of those shadows, I'm going to add a little bit more purple to that green, and you're going to get some darker tones, darker shadows. You probably noticed we haven't used any black yet. I'm not sure we will. Maybe when we get to the front and we really want some contrast in the wheels, or you know, underneath the truck, we might do that. But so we're not trying to draw the leaves or anything in. What we do is we just leave out things. So if you wanted, you could try a little bit of orange in there, orange mixed with your green. That might give you a little bit of kind of an orangey brown color, because of the little bit of blue that's in the green. So some of those leaves that are in there, you can mix those in. But y'all kind of know what's going to happen with color, don't you? We had enough experience with color. I don't know. You never get enough experience. And I always ask myself, you know, when I'm doing things, what kind of colors do I want to use? And it's really dependent sometimes on your mood. I get asked all the time, how do you know what colors to use? You really don't. You just do your best. And it's most of it is about value anyway, not really about color. This is just a little more purple mixed in there, and you can just dabble that in to get a few little darker areas. And when I say dabble in, that's kind of what I'm talking about. You just touch it. Make sure that when you touch your paint with your brush, that your brush is dry. I mean, even if you don't want to clean off your brush, make sure it's dry, because then it won't drop paint into your palette. It'll just pick it up. So just so you know, when you start hearing things about artists and their techniques, the first one we did is called the wet on wet, and that's when you get your fuzzy edges. Now what we're doing is dry on dry. Our paint is kind of dry. It's not soppy wet. And so as we lay it in, you're going to have sharper edges, which is what you want to do in the foreground. And you can basically use what kind of colors you want in there. It's kind of interesting when you're painting, you're not thinking, I mean, you're thinking trees, but you're not thinking leaves and things like that. They kind of happen. You just kind of do all the colors around it and dabble it in, and all of a sudden you look at it and go, oh yeah, that's trees. But I'm not really thinking trees. I think overall people work their watercolors too much when they're starting out. And remember, just give it that latitude to do whatever it does. So just because of the interest of time, and we could spend a couple hours on this, but we only have an hour, and we want to get through most of it. So I'm just going to work on the truck and the barn and maybe some of this grass down here. So the first thing I'm going to do with the truck is I'm going to grab some of my purple, lay it over here on my palette. And the purple by itself is a little bright, but that's okay. Maybe a little blue with that. That purple and that blue. And if you want to tone that down a little bit, let me show you what I'm doing here. So I've got a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue over there, and I want to tone that down. I'm going to take some of the yellowy green that I've got in there. Just going to mix that up with it. I'm just going to tone down some of my purple. It's still got some of that blue in there. I'm going to use my paintbrush kind of like a marker and kind of be working on that truck in those darker areas. I'm probably not doing this the same way a lot of people do it. There's probably many, many ways to do this. Window's kind of soft and fuzzy, so I'm just going to take some water and stick it in there and just see what happens. It's going to touch some of that paint. Don't mix it too much. Just put that water in and let it do its thing. Add a little green to that. Maybe what I'm going to do is take a little bit of yellow and just dabble it into it. Just a little bit. Maybe some of this blue and dabble it into it. Remember, it's going to be doing its own thing, so it's going to start to smear and do its thing, but what you're going to see is not what you're going to get in the next 10 minutes, because as it sits, it's going to do its thing. Some of that orangey red, that rusty color that we got beforehand is going to be great for this. Maybe a little more orange in that rusty top there. I'm going to try a little bit of brown with my purple. See if that doesn't make it a little darker. So on my lid, I've just mixed a little bit of brown with that purple that I had there. It gave it kind of a real dark kind of a tone. I'm going to try to avoid black. I think black itself is just not a great color. Some of those highlights on the tire are kind of blue. I'll probably use some blue down in there too. I just want to add all the color that you look at it and you think, well, I see that color in there. Go ahead and add it. So that whole idea of impressionism, the more color, the better. And remember, you can always go darker. You can always go darker. This really dark stuff I've got in here is just purple and brown. It's a great way to make a little bit of darkness. You can add blue to that too. Remember, black is just all the colors mixed together. So you can continue to make anything dark just by mixing colors. Specifically your like your blues and your purples. I'm going to do the barn pretty quick. I'm going to start out with water. I'm just going to water my edges. And hopefully that water is going to kind of add like a mask. And it's just going to put those colors where I want them. Take a little orange, a little bit of blue. You're going to get that rusty kind of tone. If you want to add a little red to that, you could too. Totally up to you. Maybe I will just add a little bit of red just to give it that barn redness. The roof is probably more purple. Maybe a little bit of yellow mixed with our purple. To tone it down, give it that grayness. So I just mix a little yellow with that purple, and it's going to give me a nice gray. That's probably too much yellow in there. I want it a little more purpley. Trying to jump the gun here a little bit on some of this, so it might bleed together. I should wait until it's a little drier. So maybe while I wait for that to dry, I'm going to do this area here. And I'm going to try to leave out where the windmill goes. Maybe do that separately. And that's pretty dark. Maybe some orange and some brown and maybe a little purple to darken that up a little bit. I have to go back over that, but it's an okay start. Well, we didn't get a whole lot. Did you see what happened to my wall? That's because I was jumping the gun. I was trying to go a little faster than I should have. But once that dries, we can take care of that. Thanks for coming along on this little journey with me. This little artistic discovery. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you had a lot of fun. And art makes life better. It just does. I hope you have a lovely day.